I'm PQ, this is my shop. Welcome back. I'm going to try a little bit different of a format this time. This time I want to go into some uh, parts of the car culture that are different now than they were back in the 80s, 90s, and how that affects your project. When you're working on your project, you're going to find things have changed. Even in the last 5 years or so, things have changed a lot. There's a lot to be thankful for, and there's a lot that we miss. I made myself a little list of items I'd like to hit, and if this kind of format is something that you like and you would like to see me do more of, please let me know down below in the comments. You know, I might touch base a little bit here about where I grew up, hence why I'm wearing the shirt. 40 years since I graduated, got a big 40-year high school reunion coming up in the spring, and it might give me an opportunity to go to some of the places that I talk about and actually see what they look like today compared to maybe if I could find some pictures. I've put the comments out, little feelers out to some of my friends. Hey, if you got any pictures or stories, video, which was rare back then in the 80s, any video or something that you would like me to share the content of about where we grew up, which is Quakertown, Pennsylvania. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of the things that have changed and what I've found since I started working on this car. Number one thing is that there's things that we took for granted back in the day that just aren't available anymore. There used to be radiator repair shops everywhere you went. You could take your radiator in there and they'll be able to fix it, plug the holes, paint it, do the whole works, pressure test it, and give it back to you. And it was at a decent price. Those places don't exist anymore. And it's a shame because it's one of those things that with any car, you could use that. But a lot of Chinese stuff has become cheap and irreplaceable, kind of similar to brakes. Brakes are the same way. You can't find a place anymore that'll cut a set of drums or rotors for you. But that was common practice in every little corner repair shop there was back in the day. And I kind of miss that stuff because it made keeping and maintaining these cars much easier. But of course, you know, if my father was alive, he'd tell you about how asbestos brakes were the best brakes ever. But he did say polyglass or the original tires just sucked. You couldn't drive anywhere without getting a flat. That's what he would always say. But I digress. Parts professionals is another thing that we have a hard time going. How many times have you gone in for your muscle car and they ask you, you know, is it four-wheel drive? Or maybe if you go in and you look for something innocuous like I don't know, a light bulb, and they ask you what size engine, what size transmission. It used to be people knew parts and they knew what crossed with what and what would fit what, even if it was across manufacturers, you know, GM to Dodge to Ford. Everybody kind of knew what fit what or what you could make work, which goes back to the other part is junkyards. Junkyards back in the day had what was called a Hollander book, and I'll show you one here I have. It covered about 10 to 15 years, and you could look up any part that you wanted to look up for a particular vehicle, and you could cross-reference it to another vehicle so that if they could tell you, no, I don't have any of those, I don't have any 73 Challengers, but I do have a couple of 85 Cordovas or something that part would fit. So these are things that we're missing. Now on the plus side, we have YouTube, where you can watch how-to videos on how to do stuff. Back in the day, unless you knew somebody or you went to school for it, you either learned on the fly or you got somebody else, a friend or somebody who knew how to do it, and got him to do it for a couple six-packs or so. Because back in the day, in Quakertown, they had this bumper sticker that was going around, and I'll have to see if I can find somebody that's got one to send me a picture of it. But it said Quakertown, home of the Summer Nationals. Well, there's no drag strip in Quakertown in the 80s. There was a place close by called Vargo's, but that was pretty much closed by the time I was in high school and driving. That had closed down. Rumor has it was closed down because nearby farmer's cow wasn't giving milk. And they've had a couple car shows there over the years, not in a few years. I think the last time was like, I don't know, a few years ago. They had a car show or something there, kind of a nostalgic throwback to Vargo. And every once in a while you'll find a sticker or a t-shirt or something somebody's making up, Vargo's Dragway. Some cool pictures online you can see. And you know, it was just a really, really fun place to grow up, and I wouldn't trade my youth growing up there for anything or any other place in the world. I thought, you know, when I was young, and I thought, man, I can't wait to get to California, because we had all these visions of what California was like, and the car scene and all this, and it was, it really was. I got to go out there later on as a Marine, but I didn't get to enjoy it as much because I had a job to do, and being in the Marine Corps takes up all your time. Availability of parts is a plus these days. There's so many remanufactured parts for some of these older muscle cars that you have an ability to do it, way more than there was in the 80s. In the 80s, these cars were dirt cheap. Nobody wanted them. They were rotting out. Even back then, they were less than 10 years old sometimes, still rotting out. And that's the story with a lot of these Mopars, a lot of Fords too, and Chevys, you know, box Chevy trucks. I find it hilarious these days. That's like a thing. And they're a good looking truck, don't get me wrong. But those things were rot boxes from the day they were born. They had a dual ply fender on them, and it rotted out right away. The wheel wells rotted right away. And they weren't very good. I can't tell you how many came in the shop when I was working a body shop that were only a couple years old that needed work. It's just funny how we reflect on things differently now than we did back then. Car shows. Car shows used to be free to spectate. People would line up their cars, they'd have a showing or whatever, and people could go in and look at the cars for free. I think it was appalled. It's like, I don't know, I can't remember how many years ago, but apparently I was behind on the curve. I didn't go to car shows for many years, and I decided to go back. My wife and I, we were dating. We decided to go to a car show. We go up there, and it was like $6 or $9 to get in. And I'm like, what? You're charging for a car show? I came here to look at people's cars, which goes back into another tangent about how did we get to where we're at. It's a double-edged sword with this one. Auctions. Those big name auctions that you see on TV on a Friday, Saturday night. Cars are going for crazy amounts of money. That started back in the 90s. And that really drove up the price of these cars from, like I said before, they were junk. They were considered junk back then. Nobody wanted them. They were, 10, 15 years old, and they had outlived their usefulness to our parents' generation, so they became our generation in the mid-80s. Those auctions, as well as they did drive up the prices, they also drove up the amount of parts that are available. Because once these cars became, hey, these things are valuable, pop-up companies came up and started remaking sheet metal parts and remanufacturing doodads and this, that, the other. Which brings me back to another part. I have never seen where a part like this, and the part I'm talking about is a brake power booster. Brake power boosters used to be one of those things you just went into your local auto parts store, they'd pull one off the shelf, do the exchange, and go about your ways. When it comes to these older cars, they don't really, especially Mopars. Mopars have a 4-bolt master cylinder, and Chevy, GM, Ford, they all have 2-bolt master cylinders. This particular car, the 73, had a Midland single diaphragm power booster, and this is what the original one looked like. I went on, it's got some rusted pitting around there. It really didn't seem to hold any vacuum. I tried to leak down test on it. It's just so bad shape that it was hard for me to get one. So, I went over to the auto parts and looked on the Rock Auto and the AutoZone and the rest of them, O'Reilly, and looked at them, and they'd have it listed, but it wasn't available. Now, they only use those Midland single diaphragm ones from like 1970 to 79, so there's a 9 year period that they use the single diaphragm ones. And once they started moving into more disc brakes, front and rear, then they started moving into the dual diaphragm styles. So I started looking on the marketplace. I found a gentleman that happened to be on my way to Tennessee that had one, so I picked that up. And although it's in better shape than the one I have, I started looking deeper in it. I thought, well, maybe I could get a rebuild kit for it. Well, I did find a rebuild kit for it. The rebuild kit is almost $400. By the time it ships to me, it'll be over $400. There's only 2 people that I found in the entire country who rebuild these things that are reputable. There's a couple others out there that I've heard bad things about, but like I said before, I'm not here to blow people up. I'm here simply to talk about the issues that I have and what might help you going forward. So there's 2 places that can do these, and their prices are over $500-$600. So what did I end up doing is I ended up going to MBM and finding a brake system there, and I found the actual dual diaphragm booster on the marketplace. And the dual diaphragm on the marketplace actually is from MBM, and it matches the rest of the system that I bought. But it looks more like the ones that you found on the Hemi Challenger, so it won't be exactly the same. Now, you could go Willwood if you want to spend a lot of money. That's fine. For me, just interested in braking. I didn't want to change this thing a whole lot. Yes, it's going to have a lot of different things, digital gauges and things like that, but it's still going to have the bones of the Challenger. I wanted to, people see it and it's going to look like a Challenger, like something from the 80s, like what I grew up in. It's nostalgia. It's what we're trying to do. Another item that I found it difficult finding parts for is the emergency brake foot pedal assembly. Seems like everyone who's got one for sale wants $1 bazillion for it, and it's not in much better shape than the one I have. There's not many parts for this thing to rebuild it. You can get the lever for it, the handle, and you could get a cable for it. Other than that, you're kind of on your own. And with a 4-speed car, I kind of want the emergency brake to work. So that's one of those issues that I'm still dealing with. When I'm not out here in the garage working on my project, I'm spending a lot of time on the internet. My wife says I can find anything on the internet. I don't know. I just have the patience to keep looking and searching in different ways. Remember the Dewey Decimal System and going to your public library? I think that's where I learned how to do the searches online. It started from there. You had to know how to cross-reference something into something else. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, or I was hoping to divulge into if I get some of these pictures back, is I would like to revisit some of those places where I grew up in Quakertown. Sometimes things happen for a reason. And as I'm filming this, like I said, I put feelers out to find out some more information about some of the car culture stuff and stories from some of the folks who went to school out there. And so I just got done going back and forth for the last, I don't know, 12 hours or so with Bill Hunn. And Bill Hunn, I'm going to read some of what he wrote because this is his story. But it also is the story of Quakertown and the car culture. Now, I don't know Bill personally. We both belong to a group on the Facebook called Plaza Nights because it was the Quakertown Plaza was the major cruising hub of the time. And he's a few years younger than me, so the stories he's going to tell took place in the late 70s, 77, 78 time period. So the first thing he said to me was, I saw your Facebook post. I have a few stories to share. This is a photo of the decal we made in Mr. Meese's graphic art class in 1978, Quakertown High School. So Quakertown, home of the Summer Street Nationals. And this sticker, according to Bill, they pasted this thing everywhere. Telephone, light poles, any place they could put it. They've even placed it on police cars to the chagrin of the police chief in Quakertown. But apparently they used to tag this bumper sticker on the back of police cars. So what some people don't know watching this channel is that I'm a graphic designer by trade. That's what I went to college for. That's what I did for 25 years. I did graphics, and I worked with many advertising firms, both inside and outside the motorsports. I did some stuff for the Navy and missile defense and some other contracting jobs. But anyways, I'm going to remake this sticker, which I've already reached out to Bill and showed him what I've created, and it's pretty good. Plus, I have something else in the works along that line for the 40th anniversary of my graduation in Quakertown in general. So I'm going to just start by reading off some of what Bill's story is, and I'm going to show you some pictures that he sent. He said, "This is my 1970 green Roadrunner. I bought it used in April of 1977, built a 383 4-speed pistol grip with 390 gears. Was one hell of a fast car. One night in July 1977, I was pulling out of the plaza. I had some wheel spin and squealing of the tires. Quakertown officer Miller decided it was enough to pursue me up 309, which is the main drag that runs through Quakertown. The speedometer in these cars went up to 150. I buried it by the time I passed Melody Lakes golf course, which is approximately, from there, it might be 2 miles down the road. Went down into Coopersburg, which is the next town north of us in Quakertown, and turned into Charles Street, what was then the Scat gas station, onto Old Bethlehem Pike, headed back southward, and at the top of a hill at Green Top Road, the pavement had a big transition bump at the Lehigh County line. I ended up rolling the Roadrunner into the ditch because of the air shocks being fully extended. He never had a car again with air shocks, at least not ones that are fully blown up. Officer Miller finally arrived at the scene and arrested me. He was so mad because he blew the engine in that new V8 Malibu patrol car trying to catch up to me. I was lucky as I only had a few scratches. Miller pressed charges against me, but when the court date arrived, he was a no-show. I found out many years later why he didn't show for the court date. His wife had him in divorce court the same day. I only wish I had that car today, as it was the fastest car I ever drove. I never lost a race in it, cruised Hamilton Street in Allentown, and Pottstown as well. So Hamilton Street was also another cruise place. And the sign I showed earlier on the telephone pole, that's the first place it popped up at. Those signs popped up off of Hamilton Street in Allentown. Well, bashing on Officer Miller some more. I don't know this gentleman, and I apologize. I don't even know if he's alive anymore to tell his side of the story, but I'm always free to hear it. So if he's around and anybody wants to speak up for Officer Miller, feel free to contact me below. Another story about Officer Miller is he always harassed all of us back then. He would always come around and break up any gatherings in the plaza. One night, he was chasing Mike McGurney in his 1966 Chevy Nova. I used to live on the 309 behind the old highway marine boat shop in Cherry Road. I remember sitting outside on a Friday night and I hear this car coming down 309. When it turned into Cherry Road, I saw it was Mike's car. Right behind him was Miller in his new Malibu police car. Up at Clay Avenue, there's a hard left turn. Miller didn't make the turn and totaled the police car. After that chase, he was never allowed to pursue anymore. He was costing the town too much money for repairs. This was only 2 months after he chased me and blew up the motor in the other one. So here's a picture of Bill, his 1978 graduation photo with his 1970. So he got another 70 Roadrunner. This one's a 446 pack car. He got it for his 18th birthday, and he says that his parents were saints for putting up with him in his newfound hobby. And he says other people would probably agree. Today, Bill is retired. He just recently purchased a 1972 Roadrunner, and this was his newest. This is his newest retirement purchase. Is this 1972 Roadrunner? And he showed a couple other pictures. His wife's 1971 Cuda and his fully restored 1970 446 pack Roadrunner. They sold both of those cars to buy a house in 1984, and now he wishes that he still had those cars today. So this is one story from one individual, and it's a great story. And I encourage you, if you're from the Quakertown area and you know exactly what I'm talking about, because hopefully this will make the rounds, by all means, reach out. I'd love to tell your story. The other thing I was talking to Bill about was I would love, since a lot of these guys still have their cars from back in the day, I would love to do kind of a focus, a showcase on your car and hear some of your stories in person. You show me around your car, or if you have a collection, show around the car collection, and I can share it with the channel and dive deeper into this whole car culture in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, in a little town called Quakertown. I also spoke about Vargo's, known as Vargo's Raceway. Actually started in 1959, was in a kind of residential / agricultural area in Percy, which is like right outside of Quakertown to the south. And that drag strip was open from 1959 to about 1969. So it was closed way before I ever was in high school and had a car. It was closed. I was like 2 years old when it was closed, but its mystique never ended. It was a big thing back then. Even Big Daddy Don Garlett's raced there at one point. So I mean, it was a well-known drag strip at the time. And if I can include some video here, if not, you can check it out. There's a few channels on YouTube that have a little bit of footage. I'd like to be able to find some pictures. They did have car shows there up until 2019, and apparently they overbooked the area, which created a problem, and the new owner decided he just didn't want that kind of issues with the local police and the local areas, so they haven't had anything there. I would love to, when I'm up there in the spring, stop by and see if they'll let me do a little walk around at the track and just shoot some empty pictures, because apparently the pavement is still there, and that's where they used to have the car shows. And we used to spend time in places where we drag raced, street raced. Shh, don't tell nobody. And then other places where we went. Maple Grove Raceway was our local drag strip, and that's Monton, PA. It's about an hour and a half from Quakertown, and a lot of us would drive out there, race, and then drive home. They used to have a competition called the High School Nationals, and you would compete. You would sign up as a high school and compete against other high schools, bracket racing, for a trophy. And if you participated in that, they used to have these dash plates they used to give out that said, and I'll try to show one here if I could find one, that said participant. So it said, high school national participant. And those were cool, and it's just one of those things that I remember from back in the day. It was a different time period. I remember one time I went out there with my buddy Teddy, the one I talked about that passed away, and he was drag racing his fair lane, and he blew a rear end in the fair lane. And so he gave another friend of mine specific instructions to go back to his house in his garage, grab another rear end, and drive back. So you figure out the distance. So he started tearing apart the rear end and pulling all the little bits and chunks out of there. We drove back to Quakertown. Well, it wasn't quite in Quakertown, but almost. Hour and a half back, put it back together, and still made it to race. And to this day, it's really crazy to think about these stories. And I love sharing these stories. There's some really cool places there in Quakertown that I reminisce about. It was a really great time to grow up in the 80s. There wasn't all this worries. There was some talk about nuclear war with Russia, but it really was a feel-good era. There wasn't all this racial issues and all this split and division and hatred. And we were kind of the generation that had learned MLK's message, and that we were a colorblind society to an effect. And I really felt that. I didn't find out what the race issues were until I joined the Marine Corps, and I was put together with people from all over the country, and I found out that some people aren't so nice to other people based upon what they look like or where they came from. And sometimes I talk to my friends that I went to school with, and they all say the same thing. I wish we could go back to those times. I wish my kids could have grown up in that kind of time. It was much more basic, much more simple. People weren't offended by every little thing. If you dished it out, you better be willing to take it. I mean, that's the way I learned. You better be able to take it if you can dish it out. But I'm hoping to take some time in the future and take some time to revisit some of the places that we went, where I grew up at, where I went to school, where we used to cruise at on a Friday, Saturday night, and some of the things that have changed since then. In the 90s, they started putting up these signs on the things. You can't drive by here more than twice in an hour period, or you're going to get arrested. And for most of us, that cruising lifestyle is where we met girlfriends, spouses, where we interacted with friends. It was our social. It was the Facebook of the 80s. And I hate to use that because it was much, much better than that. Because anything that's done in real life is much better than what's done online. And you couldn't hide who you were. Like now online, you can hide who you are. You can be this persona of a person that if nobody knows you, then you can get by with that. But in real life, when you had to face these people face to face, and you had to deal with them on a daily basis, you learned how to deal with conflict. I often say this a lot. You notice on the school buses, the parents or the school bus stops at every driveway. It doesn't have a corner spot at a corner street where all the kids convert. And I say we kind of did ourselves an injustice, because there was one thing you learned at a stop sign, corner, bus stop that you can't learn when you get picked up at your individual driveway. And that is how to deal with other people with different opinions. When you go to the corner stop sign and you meet Johnny, and Johnny's got a different political view than you, you're exposed to that. And maybe you like Johnny, so maybe you try to take some time to understand where he's coming from. Where does he learn his stuff? Probably from his parents, like most people. But when you don't do that, I'll take it one step farther. So then when you go to the stop sign and you meet Johnny, Johnny has a different opinion for you, and Johnny's a complete and total asshole, right? So how do you deal with Johnny? Maybe you pop Johnny in the mouth. I'm not condoning violence, but you learn how to deal with conflict one way or another. Either you settle it with words, a handshake, you settle it with a fight and a handshake. I've got friends, I've got good friends, who got into fist fights, and then after the fist fight, they became best lifelong friends. There's something to be said about that. I think we all took in the whole anti-bullying campaign, but there was something to be learned from it. And I hate to say that, but it's true. I got bullied. Some of y'all got bullied. Maybe we bullied other people. And we've learned to be more compassionate because of it. But you learn something about society. Life is never going to be equal. It's never going to be fair. And that's because things happen to different people. Maybe one of your friends gets cancer at a young age, great person, passes away. Is that fair to the person who is a jerk their whole lives and lives to be 100? Is it fair when children pass away of illnesses? Is it equal the way people are treated? And I'm not talking about racially or by the government or whatever, but is it fair that some people can mistreat other people and never pay a price for it, while others can claim to be the victim when they're actually the perpetrator? And these are the things that I think about. And I digress. I don't want to go into all this politics type stuff. I essentially want to get back to the fact that it was really a great time to grow up in Quakertown in the 80s. We used to go cruising in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. And that was 40 minutes away from where we were at, straight out 663, which was a straight line highway that a lot of us, kind of tested the pipes a little bit. Drinking and driving wasn't a big deal. I hate to say that, but it wasn't back then, or at least it was a big deal, but it was something that they didn't enforce a lot of. And a lot of us lost friends to that. So it's not something that you should do. But we used to ride out to Pottstown. Pottstown had cars of every kind of thing you can think of. You think American Graffiti meets, I don't know, Shirley Muldowney or something, It was modern enough, but it was crazy enough to see tubbed out cars, blown, dual quads, cars that probably shouldn't be driven on the street, but they're essentially just going back and forth. And we all had this little route, we used to ride up High Street and turn around in the McDonald's parking lot and come back down, and that's what we did all night long, all night. And like I said, that was our socialization. That's how we met like-minded people. That's where we got challenged to race. It's where we got to see other people's cars, meet new people, and talk to people who felt like you do and thought like you do. Lansdale was another place we used to ride down 309 down to Lansdale. That was a little bit farther. Well, not really. It's the next town down on the turnpike. So it depends on how you went. We used to take 309 a lot, but you could take the turnpike and get off there as well. But it was a nice place to go and to cruise up and down. And when they started tightening down this, the cops would come out, scare everybody away, and then we'd go down to the next town, cruise around there, and when we got scared out of there, we'd come up there. And it's kind of a cycle, kind of just cruise around. There was a few other places, that we used to visit. There was Ghost Mountain, had a covered bridge. It's a crazy story about albinos, if you shut your lights off and honk your horn 3 times or whatever it was, these albinos would come out. And it's kids, so you take your date up there and scare half to death by having your friends, which we've done. Have your friends up there and hide. And then they know the sound of your car when they came, so they come in, shut the lights off, and blow the horn 3 times. And then we'd scoot up the side of the car and start tapping on the side of the car. And you hear everybody screaming inside. It was good fun. It was good fun. And it was just a great place to grow up. I'm trying to think of some other places. Pumping Station Road, right to go out California Road. Pumping Station Road used to run right next to what was the American Olean Tile Factory. That's where my mother worked and a lot of our parents worked. That whole area on California Road was kind of an industrial park where a lot of our parents worked. But from there was a railroad bridge that you go underneath, and right on the other side of the railroad bridge, there was actually a line, and it was for years. I don't know if it's still there. I'll have to look when I go back. There's a line painted across the road, which was the starting line. And you'd race down, as crazy as it was, get down to a single lane bridge, girder bridge. It was narrow. I wouldn't say it was single, but it was a narrower part of the bridge, and that's where the finish line was. So that's where the races would go. A lot of times, see who is the toughest guy on the block, the fastest car. The high school parking lot was it was like a car show every day, and a lot of us would get there an hour before class started, and just hang out in the parking lot and chip chap and talk. And they started cracking down on that too. And now the parking lot's completely different. It used to be flat. Now it's kind of raised. I had a friend, George. He graduated a couple years before me. He had a gold 73 Charger. And one day, he'd come out of there. Everybody would kind of do burnouts and stuff, and the cops would have to come. But he did a burnout, lost control, and hit the telephone pole right in front of the high school. And from that day on, he was known as Crash. He's gone now. He's no longer with us. But I don't forget those days. We used to go to the Votech school and spend half of a day at the Votech. And you could pick what you wanted to do when you were a freshman. Like I decided to do auto body, so I did auto body. But there's, you had your agriculture, and you had auto mechanics and carpentry and different types of technical skills that you could learn. For those of us who, at the time, didn't have any inkling for college, come later on, I ended up going to college. But in any case, one of the guys we went to high school with had I think it wasn't a GTO, it was like a Tempest. And for some reason, it was a nice car. He ended up showing off and trying to show off and passed like 5 school buses and lost control. And it spun out in front of one of the school buses and got hit. And there's a picture of it in the newspaper. But years later, I ran into him, and I mentioned that kind of a joking manner because, hindsight, you could look back on things like that and say, oh, that was one of the dumbest days of my life. But no, he actually tried to say it never happened. And I have the newspaper article to prove it. So where I grew up is Quakertown West End Apartments, and I actually lived in an apartment growing up. But luckily enough for me, I had friends who had garages and things like that. Matter of fact, this Challenger, uh, the guy who owned it, I went to school with his brother Todd, and Todd had a '70 Challenger, and if I have a picture, I'll show it here. And him and I used to ride around everywhere together. Well, eventually, I don't know what happened. He got rid of that car or whatever, but I started hanging out with his brother. His brother had this red Challenger, and it never went in the garage. It was always out in the parking lot at the apartments. So they lived in the other side of the building on the 3rd floor. I lived on the bottom floor, and I lived there from the time I was about, 10 years old till I graduated high school. And, Todd and I became real good friends. Mark was a few years older than me and owned a Challenger. Him and I became good friends, and it was a really cool place to live at the time for what it was, an apartment. And there was a gentleman who lived in the complex. He actually lived in the next building over as well. There was actually two people I want to talk about. One was, I don't know his name, but he had a '57 Chevy. And he was your atypical, I don't know what you call it, greaser guy. He had the, Brill cream in the hair, and he'd be out there working on his car, and he'd lean over, and when he leaned over, his hair, his pompadour would come out, and it would just hang down like this. And I'd watch him grab his comb out of his back pocket, and he would just go, and it was right back up on top of his head. That gentleman drove that '57 Chevy daily until the day he died. And I'm not sure what year it was he died, but I used, when I go home periodically, I'll drive through the apartment complex just to see, reminisce, see how it changed. And I was like, son of a gun, that thing's still here. It was still there because he was still alive. And even though he didn't work anymore, he was retired, it was still there. And I want to say that was like 2007. So he drove that thing daily for a long, long, long time. And he worked on it himself. One of the other things, another guy that was there, his name was Ron, and he worked over at the tile with my mother. So Ron used to feed my terrible cigarette and beer habit. Whatever it was, 80's, different time. But he had one of those little red wagon trucks. Totally cool. He was a Dodge guy. He had another truck before that. It was a Dodge, but yeah, he had one of those little red wagons, I remember. There were just some really cool cars in the area at the time. And, going through doing some research for this and upcoming videos about Quakertown and the car scene, come to find out, a lot of these guys that I went to school with still have the cars that they had back in the day. I took a bunch of pictures when I was there in high school, and these cars, like I said, they still own them. Some of them they drive, some of them they don't, but the fact that they still own these cars 40 years later, it speaks volumes. And at this point, why get rid of it, especially if it's, in good shape. But anyways, this is enough walk down memory lane. I hope you enjoyed this. Like I said, if this is something that you enjoy, you'd like me to dive more into, please, by all means, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know when the next one comes. And hopefully by the next video, I'll have the parts that I'm waiting for, which is the whole reason why I did this video, is because I'm still waiting on parts before I can finish this. We'll leave that up, but until I can finish these other parts and put the video on there, that's why I went ahead and did this video. So thank you again, and until next time, peace.